you very much. We're going to get going again here. This next session is a bit of a, we call it a town hall session. Again, it's designed to be interactive. We've got a number of panelists here with us today. Leading this discussion is a fairly long-time friend that I met through the partnership of water sustainability in BC. Peter Law is on the board of the partnership. He's been with us since our inception. Brings a lot of energy and value to the partnerships group and meetings, a tireless and committed member to the partnership, always coming over to the mainland when we have our director meetings. The other part of Pete's role and function is with the Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat and Enhancement Society as president. They were one of the main people and groups featured at the event yesterday. And I want to introduce Pete Law, who's going to lead us through this next town hall session. Pete?
Somehow I'm on the far right-hand side of the screen here. You can hardly see me. Well done. Okay, thanks you for coming. This is the Watershed Health and You panel. First, I'd like to just quickly introduce the panel members. In no particular order. First of all, I'm going to introduce Domenico Idenardo. He's the Vice President of Forest and Sustainability and Chief Forester of Mosaic Forest Management. Just give us a wave. Okay. Julie Pisani, RDN's Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Coordinator. Give us a wave. The only female on the panel, yeah. Vaughn Figuera, Director of Engineering and Public Works for the City of Parksville and Lead Project Engineer on the Englishman River Water Services. And Dr. Gilles Wendling, the Principal Hydrogeologist for GW Solutions in Nanaimo. Great! We're off. So, my role in this panel is to act as moderator. I'll try to keep the speakers in the session on time and ensure you get lots of questions and opportunity for questions. So, for fun, I have a bag of stale buns that I'd like to throw just in case things get off the rails. So watch out for flying buns. We have each speaker speaking for 5 minutes. If they go over that 5 minutes, then there could be a bun heading in their direction. Of course, I will also use the buns to throw at any audience members who ask questions that I think are a little bit off topic. And also for any audience members who I see on their phone over the next hour. Okay, so here's my bun. There's the buns. Actually, they're not stale this time around. So let's start off and get into the presentation. I have asked our panel members to focus their presentations on our local watershed, the Englishman River, as a test case. Panelists are familiar with the watershed and its biophysical attributes and have the technical expertise to provide us with some insights in how they see the whole system approach working to reconnect hydrology and ecology in the Englishman watershed. So quickly, some gee-whiz facts about the watershed. The watershed's 324 square kilometers. Headwaters are Mount Arrowsmith at an elevation of 1817 meters. It drains east 35 kilometers to discharge in the Salish Sea by the city of Parksville. There are 5 species of Pacific salmon and 2 anadromous trout present and have access to half the watershed. There are 4 major tributaries. Over 87% of this watershed's lands are privately owned by Island Timberlands and Timber West. So, let's get into my presentation. Why did that move forward? Okay. This is a story about a local, first of all, I'm going to speak to the subject of a small stewardship group here in Vancouver, or here in this watershed. This is a story about how a local group of stream keepers with a name that nobody can remember, but commonly referred to as mibbies, have morphed from a focus of salmon and trout. Who put the timer on? I didn't put the timer on. Okay. Anyway, stewardship groups such as ours helping and to gather and monitoring data to support effective aquatic restoration prescriptions that are often not located in streamside areas that can have positive impact for water and fish. MIBIs came into existence in 1998 with the mission of conservation and restoration of salmon habitat on the endangered Englishman River watershed. Over the years, our streamkeeper group was blessed to have a fearless leader in Faye Smith, seen here before her passing. Faye recognized that watershed restoration can only be successful if it involves community in a collaborative effort. I think it's important to highlight some of the significant conservation events that have happened over the past 20 to 30 years in this watershed that laid the groundwork for where we are today. Importance of strategic land purchases by the Nature Trust in 1981, starting in 1981, with the purchase of the estuary at $2.7 million, followed by the agreements to purchase 2 large blocks of riparian forest in the middle reaches of the river, have helped to secure 300 hectares of environmentally sensitive lands. In 2001, after the river was designated an endangered river by Outdoors River Council, an infusion of funding by the newly established Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund followed. I think it's important to note many of these early efforts to secure conservation were strongly supported by forest companies, along with Nature Trust and local government. So in 2001, with funding from the Pacific Salmon Endowment Fund, chaired by Rick Hansen, and also by Living Rivers Trust, managed by the BC Conservation Foundation, a total of about $1.3 million in projects to improve steelhead and coho rearing habitats were brought forward in the watershed. During the 12 active years of During 12 active years in the recovery plan, there were 50 reports completed and the results of many of the projects that were done. So, our society acted as the chair of the Watershed Recovery Roundtable, composed of agencies and landowners and local governments from 2002 to 2015, and helping to provide community support. We also informed the Oceanside community about habitat restoration activities through a newsletter called The English Patient. We also applied for funding towards, we also worked on streams such as Shelly Creek, some tributary streams, and we also applied a lot of training activities in our watershed. And who hasn't taken a streamkeeper course from Dave Clough? In 2013, members of the Watershed Roundtable decided to report out on how the river was responded to 12 years of restoration efforts. A further objective of the report was to provide an indicator of a healthy watershed so that volunteers could develop a long-term monitoring program. It was envisioned that monitoring by local stewards will serve the basis for future restoration activities for the stewardship community. As the author, Dave Clough, said, community will care for and protect as much as possible its own watershed. Since starting in 2010, our volunteers embraced the idea of monitoring ecosystems and habitats in our watershed, oftentimes partnering with agencies, local governments, and private landowners on the status of certain indicators. We call the program Watershed Health and You. From water quality to fish habitat assessments, from flow monitoring to identifying fish in ditches, MIBIs has been involved in our watershed. Shelly Creek is a small tributary in the river flowing from Arrington through Parksville, and is an example of how local volunteers dedicated hundreds of hours in various monitoring projects, with each year being another data set on the watershed's health. Each data set, such as downstream smolt trapping, has been written up as a technical report available on our website. Our Shelly Creek data sets provide the foundation of materials used to write a water balance and sediment reduction plan for the creek. The report was completed in 2017, and we are actively promoting its content and conclusions to local government staff and politicians. However, MIBI's volunteers know that watershed health depends on you. So we are engaging our neighbors who live in the watershed to discuss how the community can help restore Shelly Creek. The legacy of Faye Smith and her mantra of engaging the community continues. So now we're going on to Vaughn. Good luck in trying to stay ahead of this thing.
Okay. Sounds like people can hear me on this. I thought I'd use the mic so I'm able to actually point a little bit at the screen. So my name is Vaughn. I'm the Director of Engineering and Public Works for the City of Parksville. And as was mentioned, I'm kind of a lead city engineer in terms of taking care of the new water treatment plant that's being built. We had a nice tour yesterday. I had a good turnout for that. I think there was 21 people came out to see that. And we toured the water treatment plant and the outfall valve. I will get this thing going. I'm also on the 15-second rule here per slide, so this is going to sound fast, but there will be time for questions. So I'm here to present aspects of the city's balancing act that we've had to employ to balance the needs of the community water supply with the needs of the environment. You'll see aspects of that in this presentation. So this is Parksville's vision. In there, we talk about it's got to be economically viable and also sustainable in terms of the environment. And our approach is to maintain and enhance the quality of life. We run the AWS, Aerosmith Water Service, and ERWS. AWS involves the dam. It's a partnership between Parksville, the RDN, and Qualicum Beach. ERWS supplements the water supply by adding in the treatment plant and intake. So this is what the demands were designed to be. We took into consideration OCP and the regional growth strategy in creating our design flows, and that just shows some projections of the population. This I put forward as this is 15 seconds, it's fast, but the demand management that we have to go through in red is I'll backspace it here if it goes forward. In red is on average a typical demand for a year of through the summer in red. In 2015, it was a tough year. We had quite a drought. You can see in blue there, it started to take off really early, and that's when we employed watering restrictions level 2. We had to go to level 3 because it wasn't turning around. And when we hit level 4, you can see in blue, the usage drops dramatically, and we were able to successfully negotiate it and get it back to where it should be. This is all trying to make sure that we leave enough water in the stream for fish habitat. This just shows you the full infrastructure that's involved in AWS, ERWS. There's the Aerosmith Dam up high on Aerosmith Mountain, Englishman River. Down below here, we've got the treatment plant that we're currently building. We've got the reservoirs. These represent our wells, and here's the demands for domestic water supply, and this is the demands out in Noosa and Craig Bay right here. Just gives you a sense of the whole system we're talking about. And as was mentioned by Peter, this represents the catchment, 324 square kilometers for the Englishman River. The dam is here. This is the catchment for the dam, but the Englishman River is the conveyance of all that water right down to our intakes, which are down here in the city of Parksville. This represents the dam area. So this would be the time of year in the spring when the water's full. You can see there's overflow going over the spillway here. This picture here represents what it would look like at the end of the season. The water's drawn down as far as it can go behind the dam. This is an interesting slide because in yellow here we have a gauge in the river that measures the level of the Englishman River. Typically, historically, this is what would happen. Through the summer months, it would drop to this level here, below 0.6 cubic meters per second. I've identified here the flow targets that we've worked with fisheries on as minimum flows to have in the river. 0.7 represents the critical rearing flow for fish. 1.13 is really the target, the preferred rearing flow target in the river. But our provisional operational rule indicates that we're trying to meet 1.6. We want to leave some buffer there so that we don't impact fish habitat. So that's the minimum flow that we would want to have in the river most of the time if we can do it. You can see in green that's 1.6 there. There's the preferred rearing flow target, and there's the critical rearing flow target. This represents prior to the dam being built. This is typically what we would see in terms of the levels of flow in the river. You can see that critical rearing flow of 0.6. At times we would get below that. After the dam is built, this in green is the levels in the river. Now we're able to negotiate and stay above this, most of the time stay above this 1.6 provisional operating rule, which is great news for the fish. Oh, I think you went over, didn't you? Anyway, you're taking up my time here. So you can see here's some fish counts. This is coho salmon, Chinook salmon, and pink salmon counts. 1999 is when the dam was built. These are counts prior to the dam being built. These are counts after the dam's being built. It's circled here. You can see the stocks are coming back very, very strongly. This used to be one of the most endangered rivers in BC. And now you can see the recovery there. Just because of the way we've been managing with the dam, we're able to keep those flows up when it's needed. This is just a reminder, again, this is the full system here. We're talking about the dam, and I want to show you a little bit about the treatment plant that's currently being built. So this is the infrastructure. There's a water treatment plant. And we had a tour of this yesterday, and we toured the raw water pumping station. There's also force mains that have been installed. So that's the project. This is the raw water pump station. Down here is the Englishman River, and down the bank would be the intake, the new intake from the river. That was quick, I'm catching up. There's a picture of the intake with the fish-friendly screens. We also did enhancements in the river. This is actually a large salmon right here that's using the enhancements that we were able to do in the river, put some big boulders in there and give them the ability to rest in the river. This is the current intake that will be abandoned. We've had to, in the past, go into the river, and we're going in there right now, actually, to flush out the current pipes that are buried under the gravel here. So there's quite a bit of work that we had to do in the river and disrupt the river, under permit, of course, but now that the new treatment plant will allow us not to have to do this. It's all a side inlet for the water intake. Okay. This is the new water treatment plant here that's under construction. Here's some components. We use membrane filtration. We use ultraviolet reactors to kill any viruses. This is an example of, there's a force main that went through the Englishman River. We had to actually trench right through the river. This is just after it was installed, and now you can see the recovery here. We've put in a perch here for raptors, and we've planted there. So, in summary, we've had to find ways to work with the environment and also balance the needs, the demands of the public in terms of drinking water. And I think it's working out pretty well. We just have to keep on it and make sure that we're able to meet those flows to keep those the fish habitats healthy.
Good morning. So we started getting involved in the Englishman River watershed at the request and with MVI just to try to figure out what is the role of groundwater in the watershed. But first we focused on the lower part of the watershed where sand and gravel aquifer are present. And so we were able to delineate up to 12 aquifers. And because of the participation of the public and people, passing their wells for monitoring, so we installed data loggers and were able to monitor the fluctuation of the water table. And with that, we're able to figure out in which direction the water was going, indicated with the blue arrows and the shape and the slope of the water table. And so that allowed us to understand better the groundwater regime. Then we said what's happening with bedrock, because there is a lot of water flowing through the bedrock. So same thing, we equipped some wells completed in bedrock, and we're able to figure out the movement of the groundwater in the bedrock. Then we wanted to say, okay, how do we share that with the public? So we wanted to create some images that were simple to read. And so this is kind of view from the boat. So you imagine you are walking down the river, you have the right bank on your right, the left bank on your left, and the colored pieces indicate where the aquifers are in contact with the banks and daylight in the banks. And we use the information that we collected on the dynamic of the groundwater to estimate the participation in what each aquifer was providing to the river. We also wanted to see what was the connection with the land. So from this view from the boat, we created this butterfly image. So you can see the connection with the bank. So you have the V at the lower parts, which indicate where the aquifers are in contact with the river. And then you unfold the picture to see on the right side what's happening on the right side of the river, on the left side what's happening with the left side of the river. And then you have the pink aquifer, where we see where the recharge area of this pink aquifer is. And we can, with the divide in the aquifer, we can see the actual piece of land where every drop of water ends up in the river. That was done many years, 5 years ago. And we still have the challenge of how can we best share information on groundwater? And how can we help people changing behavior? Now we have different tools, better tools. It's easier to create 3D images of aquifers. This is like software that we commonly use, it's called Leapfrog, where we can show, of course, the topography, we can show the presence of the aquifers in the subsurface indicated with the blue lenses or the blue zones. We can see the presence of the wells where information is collected on lithology. The little blue dots show where the water level was measured in the wells. So that allows to share with the public what's happening in the subsurface. Where are the aquifers? How high is the water table? And the RDN is doing a great job in trying to vulgarize, to make access to groundwater information easy to understand to the public. In 2017, we participated to this State of the Aquifer, where information on aquifers was compiled, because we wanted to know if the water table going down or going up. So you can see, I will try not to skip through the slide here. We have different symbols indicated with blue that the water table is quite stable. In green, aquifers where we have an increase of the level of the water table. and in pink where we have declining water level. And in the little brochure that the RDN produced, we can see that here we have an aquifer where we see over time, this is the high and low of the water table. And you can see that over time it's quite stable. This one here, we see that both the maximum and the minimum recorded are dropping. So we have a dropping trend of the aquifer, meaning that the aquifer is under stress. And in this example, we have a different behavior with the water table gradually going up, so there is more recharge and the water is being used. So in terms of finding new tools to share information, we have at GW Solutions focus on being able to see on the same screen information on a map. So we have here, this is for the Sodom River, and we have a gauge station that provide information on water levels over time. So on the same screen, we have a map which shows where the information comes from, and here we have daily fluctuation of flows over time, the monthly fluctuation and the daily monthly fluctuation. But just to show that we could click on another dot on the map and automatically the information will be refreshed and we get new graphs. So I think the visual, you don't have to flip through charts, you don't have to flip through pages. On one page you have all the information. So I think it's very important to interpret thousands, tens of thousands of data on one chart. And this is now available. So key points to summarize my presentation. Regarding the Englishman River, we know much more than we knew 10 years ago. And thanks for organizations like MVI, and thanks to all the volunteers we gave hundreds of hours in collecting information. And the groundwater is a key contributor to the low flows of the Englishman River. Moving forward, I think it's still extremely important to keep collecting information and to keep engaging with the community. Communication is key. How do we pass information? How do we dump information so that people with no technical knowledge can grasp what's important? Telling stories. This is how we get that information. Okay, got the message. And how do we change behaviors? I think having data is not enough. We need to reach to the psychology of the people so that people can change behaviors. Thank you.
Sure. All right. Get a better view. One bandit here, Peter. Thanks everybody. I'm Domenico. Great to see the turnout today. Congratulations to the organizers for putting this all together. And of course, I'll be talking about surface water today and how forestry interacts with surface water. And in general, just remind everyone that climate change is real. And one indicator is Dave Pluck's not wearing a toque today. And it's from April. We all know what I'm talking about there. Thanks. Here we go. So this is the Englishman River system. You've seen some other maps of this, I'm sure, earlier today in this presentation. If you think of the outer edge of that, of course, you're talking about the watershed, the Englishman watershed, 32 square kilometers, 32,000 hectares. This is the unit that a company like Mosaic considers its landscape level planning. The watershed is the base unit of ecology, and certainly on Vancouver Island, that's as applicable as anywhere else. This is where we consider a whole bunch of issues in our planning: wildlife, terrain, road stability, bridges, how we make our arrangements with the Nature Trust, for covenants, the park deals we've done with the regional district and the province over the years. And then there are dozens of sub-basins. These are the basins we manage to at the operational level to make sure our harvest levels are dispersed across the landscape and have very, very low risk of impacting large winter peak flows, which are the damaging storms that we suffer here on Vancouver Island. It's those pineapple expresses that come rolling in. So we've got that data. This is just a little image to show we have LiDAR, we have terrain, we have all sorts of inventories of timber vegetation that help us calculate these things based on well-known government data sets and studies, watershed assessment procedure, basically. So focusing in on our hydrologic management at a company like Mosaic, I'm just going to take one more minute before the buttons come out to talk about how hydrology is managed, how the concept of equivalent cleared area relates to stream flows. So I described the idea of the upper height of land of a watershed being like the upper end of a funnel. So think of the funnel. Think of the timber in that funnel as a sponge in the funnel. And then you put ice and snow on that sponge, and you've got really the conditions we have in our watersheds in the wintertime before those pineapple expresses roll through, where the temperatures go up and the rain comes down. Those are the peak flows that have the potential to disturb and destabilize streams. This sponge is recovered. This is a fully second growth watershed. Imagine this being 100 hectares. It has 0% cleared area. It is 100% recovered. It is intercepting rain and wind when there's snow all over this watershed as a normal forest would. Now, if you take 10 hectares, for instance, out of this 100 hectare watershed, say nominally, then your equivalent cleared area is 10%. And there are a whole bunch of graphs and studies that continue to relate what that equivalent cleared area could translate into higher peak flows during those damaging storms we get in the winter here on the coast. So we manage that across our landscape by knowing in very high detail at any time what the tree height is on thousands and thousands of polygons in each of those sub-basins. So we manage our equivalent cleared area on the sub-basin level, and that connects very well with all other objectives such as wildlife and drinking water quality as well. This is just an example. This is in the Englishman, so we've got some farmland where the recovery is 0, the ECA is 100%, a recently harvested area, which is also 100%, but this is a recovery, maybe a 20-year-old stand. It's intercepting rain and wind, 50% as well as a fully recovered or a natural forest would. This is fully recovered, and we add that up and we monitor it every day, and we're very much aware of our effect and how we, as forest managers, should continue to monitor and adapt our policies and continue to work with many of the fine folks in here, as well as our partners at the regional district to monitor and improve. So with that, I'll pass it over to Julie.
So I'll introduce myself while things are loading. My name is Julie Pisani. I'm the program coordinator with the Regional District of Nanaimo's Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program. And I'm going to start off my presentation, or conversation, I guess I was about to say, with an introduction on our program that we have with the Drinking Water Watershed Protection Program at the RDM. Then I'm going to talk about the specific monitoring program that we engage with volunteers on in the Englishman River watershed and other watersheds across our region. Talk about a 7-year analysis that was just completed on this data set of surface water quality data, and then I'm going to wrap it into next steps and where to go from here. So our program, this is where I'm going to have more time to speak to this tomorrow in Module A on our Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Action Plan. So the real condensed version is that this is a strategy and a plan that transcends political boundaries across the region to look at strategies for water sustainability at the watershed and aquifer scale through partnerships and collaboration. The 3 main elements of our action plan are education, so that foundational piece of understanding our water resources and our watersheds, and then layering into that the science, the data collection, the monitoring, the better resolution understanding of our local water resources, so that can flow into this 3rd element, which is planning and policy support for water sustainability in the region. So I'm going to speak about, oh geez, I should be looking behind me here. Thanks, Joe. I'm like, oh, things are going to plan, everything looks good. And I get extra time, right, Pete? Yeah, all right. Good business here. No, I'm not in business. Now I'm back. Okay. You know, see, this is what we get for being early adopters. You know, there's hiccups along the way, but we must persevere, right? So, to flashback, speaking about our action plan, and I'm going to flash forward to just speak about the science component of our drinking water and watershed protection action plan. And a specific component, we have many different initiatives that fall under our science branch of our program. But today I'm going to be speaking specifically about the surface water quality monitoring program, our community watershed monitoring network. So the Coles notes on this network, it was established in 2011, and this was in partnership very closely with the Ministry of Environment, who helped us select what are the key parameters to monitor within surface water bodies across our region to get a baseline understanding of watershed health. And so the parameters of dissolved oxygen, temperature, conductivity, and turbidity were selected as parameters to monitor with the help of volunteer stewardship groups that are trained to provincial protocol to collect this data within our region's watersheds. We use provincial protocol insofar as that we have sort of their 5 and 30 data collection standards, which means 5 samples within a 30-day period within the low flow summer period, and 5 samples in 30 days in the fall flush period. So as of right now, we have 62 active sites and 13 trained volunteer stewardship groups. And this is coordinated through the RDN's Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program with our amazing staff. We have Lauren Fegan, Joe McCallum, and Capri Brugge in the audience today, and I'll give a shout out to them at this point too. And the key thing to underscore here is that we're using provincial protocols, which lends credence to the program, but also, very importantly, the data that's collected is then input into the Ministry of Environment's EMS database, their Environmental Management System database. So the data that's collected by stewardship groups within the region, and many stewardship groups representation I see in the audience today too, so shout out to all those amazing volunteers at this juncture too. This is readily available within provincial databases that are public, open source, and they're mapped readily for folks to access. And I also want to point to the other partnership that's really important in terms of upper watershed land access provided by Mosaic Forest that gives access to monitoring the upper watershed sites. So that's a little bit on the program. I'm going to speak to the sites that are monitored, in particular, it's working, the Englishman River within our region. So this map really quickly shows the regional district of Nanaimo. We have what we call water regions, 7 of them, a basin scale sort of footprint of areas where we do our watershed planning. And in particular, the Englishman River is water region 4. And I've circled here the sites that are monitored within the Englishman River water region as part of our community watershed monitoring network. And importantly, we'll zoom back out, Mid-Vancouver Island Habitat Enhancement Society, that Pete represents, they're the citizen scientists and the dedicated volunteers that do the sampling within the Englishman River. So here's another look, and it'll load for a second, but here's another look at the watershed, but this time the colors are representing land use. So when I first started talking about water quality and the parameters that are sampled, now I'm kind of overlaying, okay, what are the land use conditions within the watershed? And you can see there's sites on Shelly Creek, Englishman River, Center Creek, Morrison Creek, and Swain Creek that are monitored in this water region. And the colors, and I'll show you the next graph will show it better as well. But you can see in the upper reaches of the watershed, green for forest use, and then as you move downstream, there's more rural residential and agricultural use, and then there's more urban developed areas, impervious surfaces, as well as you move into the towns downstream. So here's those colors, kind of now grouped in a graph that shows percentage of watershed area for each of those sample sites based on their land use type. So if I go through it really quickly, of course, the green again is the forest land use within the majority of the watershed areas for the Englishman and some sites on Swain Creek and Morrison Creek. But keep in mind, this is based on where the point in the creek that the sample is being taken. If you look upstream in that entire area of land that drains to that sample point, this is the percentage breakdown of the land use categories upstream of that point. Now you'll see in Shelly Creek, and some of you were out there yesterday on the field trip, more agricultural land base, more impervious surfaces as there's more highway corridor and roadways, paved roadways, and more residential areas within that small tributary to the Englishman River and its watershed. So now that we know the sites, I'm going to go into, very quickly, the analysis that we were able to complete. In 2018, last year, thanks, my blood sugar's been low, so I'm glad they're on hand. Very quickly, so we have a 7-year data set. It's great to collect data, but the next step is interpreting that data, finding meaning in the samples and the data that have been collected by our dedicated volunteers throughout the years. So, 3 main questions were asked of this regional analysis of the data. Are we observing changes over time? Are we observing frequent exceedances of the provincial water quality objectives and guidelines? And are there actual statistical predictors that can predict when land use is of a certain composition, and that then predict water quality results in our creeks and streams? So I know I'm going over, but it's just so worth it, Pete. Come on. Okay, so for statistical modeling, thank you for your indulgence. Statistical modeling revealed that land use types associated with human disturbance were important predictors of water quality. So not a surprise, but now it's quantified in a way that's specifically showing the fingerprints of the watersheds that we're monitoring. So categorically, watersheds that were less than 60% forest land use were associated with changes in turbidity and conductivity. Watersheds with less than 20% greater than 20% agricultural use were associated with higher turbidity, so the particle matter, cloudiness, sedimentation, indicator of erosion within the water quality, and lower dissolved oxygen. Paved road densities that are greater than 0.002 meters per meter squared associated with increased conductivity and higher water temperatures. And I won't get into this in detail because I'm getting short on time, but these were the results in particular for the Englishman River and the sites that were monitored there. In terms of turbidity, 2 things that stood out were in the Swain Creek and Shelly Creek watersheds. Again, higher representation of agricultural land use and impervious surfaces above guidelines. Close to guidelines, but not exceeded, were temperatures, so again, an indicator of riparian cover, but also of changing climates and hotter temperatures that we are observing within the summer months. And conductivity, harkening back to Gilles' presentation, talking about the groundwater influence within our creeks and streams, monitoring conductivity as an indicator, and beyond just the Englishman River, which we know we can quantify groundwater influence, we're starting to see, or through the data, we can see indicators within the smaller creeks as well. So higher conductivity values suggesting groundwater influence. So last slide, thank you. So all of this data, of course, making meaning of it, trying to find patterns, trying to have interpretation that can then give us material to inform next steps at the local government level, but also at the stewardship group level, and beyond, advocating with senior government and other agencies as well. Sampling for additional parameters. So this helps us focus, where are there areas where we are seeing changes over time or frequent exceedances? And let's get to the bottom of the source of these issues. So we're going to be doing more lab analysis for things like phosphorus, indication of agricultural runoff, also benthic invertebrate monitoring, which was mentioned by Bill Derry in the earlier presentation as well. Support for streamside vegetation, which is already going on in a lot of the creeks and streams, and then supporting the green infrastructure piece. So I'll just conclude by saying, if we build in the community engagement, we build in the data, then that gives us the ammunition, so to speak, to proceed with innovative planning and policy that has community engagement as its very foundation, science as a key ingredient, and that can help us move forward with next steps to improve water sustainability in the region. Thank you, everyone, especially Pete.
Over to...
Yep, so now that we've heard from the panel, what we want to do for between now and when we break off for lunch, we want to have and stimulate some dialogue around questions that we might have for the panel, things we might wish to ask them. Okay, what are the next steps? What does Julie maybe have planned now for the next step of their water quality monitoring program? What are some ideas we might have or suggestions from the audience around how could we maybe get involved and what things would you maybe like to see us doing? So, do we have someone, where's Where's someone from maybe the regional district of Nanaimo? I'm going to put someone on the spot here. And how about we ask someone from the regional district of Nanaimo what they might see might be some of the next steps?
That's Julie.
So that would be Julie.
Or it might be Bob Rogers, who's a politician.
Is Bob around? Where's Bob?
I can speak to this.
Excellent. Kim, why don't you pass him the microphone? While I want some questions. Let's put some of these panelists on the spot here, people. We've got them here and we've got their attention.
So my name is Ben Gelsenbrock. I'm the director on the regional district of Nanaimo, and also on the committee for the drinking water and watershed protection plan update. So the update for the next 10 years. And I just want to say thank you to all the hard work that Julie and the whole team of the RDN has in creating this very innovative program. And I think now is the work of really looking at what are the next steps. And for myself, the health of the watershed is extremely important, and it's interesting to see as Nanaimo grows and the large urban centers grow, there's much more pressure, recreational use on the outer edges of our community into forest lands as well, and there's an interface, the ENN land grant, and I'm just curious sort of managing that increased usage, the impact that has on trails and streams, and finding that balance and working together on that. So I think that's a question to pose to Julie and Domenico.
Okay, thanks. I'll start by just reminding everyone that Mosaic and the Regional District of Nanaimo have one formal agreement anyway, related to access for public recreation related to the Dumont Trails and Mountain Bike Republic of Nanaimo, which we think is an example of what we'll pursue in the future regarding fair and reasonable public recreational access on private land. I've said it before, we're not going to let the 2% of idiots ruin the exceptional recreational opportunities here on southern Vancouver Island, and that will take time, and it will take discipline working through groups and with local governments. So we think that's important. We recommend that as a primary pursuit of Mosaic. With our campsites, for instance, we have 8, but will soon be 9, and we look forward to continuing that. I'm not sure if Julie wants to add any more to that.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess what I'd add to sort of zoom out on that picture of watersheds as assets for the community, and that kind of builds on some of the discussion points from the keynote earlier, is that there's multiple benefits from a healthy watershed. So we can talk about water quality, we can talk about aquatic habitat, we can talk about drinking water for our communities, but also importantly, recreational opportunities, cultural and spiritual connection to the land and water as well. So I think the challenge for us looking ahead at next steps is, it's good to have information and data. That gives us more of a fingerprint and a better resolution understanding of what is going on locally. But then it challenges us to act in a way where we can tailor our strategies, our plans, our regulations, our policies, and our behaviors to sort of act upon now that we know, and some of it we already know it intrinsically, but now we know it scientifically and inherently, the value of water. And I think our challenge is to integrate our planning, so that at the local level, our land use plans in terms of official community plans, and development permit areas, our regional growth strategy, but then our parks management plans, our watershed and drinking water plans, our infrastructure and asset management plans, our wastewater and rainwater management, all of these things, the common thread is water and land. And I think, we're taking great strides under the direction of the current board and councils across the region to move to more of that integrated planning framework, evidence-based and knowledge-based planning. But it does start in the community, and I think it was set up for us really nicely this morning that, having that voice of the community and stewardship sector really helps to drive local governments and even then, provincial and other agencies to take on that work. And local governments, I think, we're uniquely positioned because we're closest to the resource. And I think we're lucky to have partnerships with, Mosaic, but also with Streamkeeper groups and many other agencies to kind of move in that direction of integrated planning.
My name is Vic Collins. I'm with Victoria Golden Rods and Reels Fishing and Social Club. First of all, congratulations on getting a handle on water quality, flow, and habitat. I just got a question about monitoring fish, since they're a major beneficiary of this, particularly cutthroat. So it's very challenging to measure trends in fish over time, having looked at provincial databases, even with trained consultants. Does anybody have any insights into improving fish databases and monitoring techniques that are not too intrusive on the fish themselves? Thank you.
Good question. Good question. We've struggled with that for a number of years. Of course, with the Watershed Recovery Plan that started in 2001 with a number of agencies and in particular DFO. We've tried to kind of work with those folks over time in understanding what data sets we as volunteers can help out with. For example, there's long-term data sets. One of the data sets that we've worked with, and we try not to be too intrusive on fish and fish habitat when we do this, is we've monitored one small tributary for a long time set. So we've been downstream smolt trapping on, for example, a small system called Shelly Creek. And we're going into our 9th year of data collection on that system, primarily at this time of year. There are a number of other data sets that, from a fisheries perspective, that are ongoing in the watershed. For example, the salmon escapement monitoring project that goes on during the fall, where swimmers use index portions of the river and swim down through the river, counting salmon right through the fall period. And it's a great data set. It's very, very important. There's also, so NIVIs, volunteers do not participate with that. I'd love to go and swim a river, but we don't at this point. There's also, of course, a monitoring program that's ongoing with the Ministry of Forest, Land and Natural Resource Operations, particular to steelhead. And that's a summertime electrofishing program where they have index sites on the water in the main stem of the river looking at steelhead. So we participate in providing bodies to help out, move nets and things like that. Very, very interesting and a lot of fun to do. Those are the 3 kind of data sets that from a fisheries perspective, I'm aware of. Are there others?
Funded by the Pacific Salmon Foundation called the Pacific Salmon Explorer. Anybody know more about this than me? They've been doing different areas of the province, focused on salmon, and their intention is to cover all salmon areas. They've done some of the work.
Just keep that.
Okay.
Your comment, people up there couldn't do.
Yeah, there is a system called Pacific Salmon Explorer. It's funded by the Pacific Salmon Foundation. And they've been doing it kind of in different areas. They started in the North Coast area, and now they've kind of been moving southward. Their intention is to cover all the salmon areas eventually.
I'm aware of that. Maybe I'll just make a quick comment in that regard. That's absolutely true, and it's going to be making its way across the province, represented through the Pacific region. And it's based in large part under
for the wild salmon policy is one of the key outputs in terms of a planning exercise. And it's integrated with, as I say, with the geographic area range of different stocks of salmon throughout the Pacific region. And also links in with some of the good work that folks have been doing and was mentioned here earlier in terms of the habitat status reports that look at the background of these watersheds, the state of the watersheds, pressure and state indicators that are used to help monitor these stocks. So it's going to be another tool, I think, as they say, in the toolkit, but it is broader in scale and more strategic, and that makes it very useful given where we're at these days. It's basically a data repository. Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's basically a data repository. And it's also a mapping tool, an exercise that the public will be able to engage in and be able to get a sense of the state of the watershed, specific watersheds that you may work in. My understanding, and I'll look around and maybe some of my colleagues in the room here as well, that information or data capture will be available or would be available at some point in time to help support the existing data sets within the Salmon Explorer framework, if you will. And it's geographic based. They monitor stocks, escapement returns of different species of salmon in these conservation units up and down the coast.
So I think the question was, how can this information help some of the local stewardship groups, correct?
I wonder what information is being collected over and above your escapement numbers and regions that are doing smolt counts. It kind of goes back to, I had a question about the installation of the dam and your numbers. Were they escapement numbers or were they smolt counts that were done prior to the dam installation, and then you had high peaks of counts once the dam was installed? Were those escapement?
Yeah, my understanding of it is that yes, those are escapements.
Okay, so they're not smolt counts. This is a huge spike in your returning spawning salmon. And the dam has had no impact. The dam is obviously further upstream than where they go to spawn.
Okay, what the impact of the dam has had is us to allow us to be able to, in those summer periods, to be able to keep the levels in the river higher. So to enhance the habitat so that it allows the fish to inhabit the river, more of the river.
So your earlier low returns, was this river drying out in the
Absolutely,
summer?
yes.
Okay,
yeah.
Thanks.
It's Sarah Stollard from Victoria, and I do a lot of the water quality sampling for the Capital Regional District as a contractor, and I also work in the community doing volunteer work with Dorothy, who was just speaking, doing at the culprits fence, and Mick, who has a similar question to I, because we're working on the same project. In terms of connecting up the data that's being collected over multiple years, the CRD has years and years of data, stream water quality data. Is there anything, when you have these points where you can say, this is where water quality is changing, or either for the better or worse, at these different locations, do you have anything connecting that back up with the fish presence absence in those locations, or the actual, other than the big picture where you have more salmon coming back now that the dam is in, do you have anything showing that these particular tributaries are being affected, for better or worse, by the water quality data that you've been able to collect? Is there any direct connection with what that habitat looks like for fish.
Yeah, good question. I'll do my best to answer it, but I think the piece is kind of integrating the water quality data with the fish data. And once we integrate those data sets, what you're saying is there'll be like emergent findings on the relationship between those data sets, right? So I would say that is something that is available for us to do. As the RDN, we haven't then integrated the fish data, but the water quality data that we collect is readily available for agencies that have a fish focus to bring that data set into sort of an interrelated interpretation with the fish-related data sets. I would say that the water quality objectives and guidelines that we're comparing the water quality results to often trace back to aquatic habitat health. So like the temperature guidelines for less than 17 degrees Celsius linked to coho rearing requirements, right? So the indications of creeks will receive repeatedly above 17 degrees Celsius temperatures within the summer months. I would link that to work that we've done with Dave Clough and other streamkeeper groups to take the chemistry data, but then go out on the creeks and streams and collect physical data on the creeks and streams. So doing the urban salmon habitat program, physical stream assessments to survey, where are we lacking in riparian areas, what are the different depths and substrates and topography and influences, and are there structured pools and riffles, and is it hiding places for fish, even if it is warmer air temperatures causing warmer water temperatures. So we have lots for us to then overlay the physical stream data with the water quality data, and the data is readily available for folks with a fish focus to bring those data sets together. So hopefully that answers the question. And you know what, there's so many people in the audience that probably answered that, and we need to, if you have an answer, feel free.
Bernie Welker, friends of Todd Creek Watershed Sandwich. I have a question. It seems to me that in compromised watersheds, which are most of the watersheds on Vancouver Island, that reservoirs are a necessity. I see on the Englishman River you have the Arrowsmith Reservoir. On our creek, Killarney Creek, which feeds Todd Creek and Prospect Lake, we have a reservoir that's in very bad condition, but I'm guessing that reservoirs are the way in which we compensate for all the damage done by logging and farming and impermeable surfaces, roads, and so on. I'd like you to comment on that, please.
Okay, thanks. I mean, a lot of those reservoirs are related to BC Hydro as you go up and down Vancouver Island too. So there's a secondary, or maybe that's even the primary benefit in some of those cases. All I can say is that regardless of what's happened in the past in terms of land uses, which certainly have matured and evolved and improved over the last 150 years, there is legacy restoration and recovery happening. Some of it's active and some of it's just passive as nature heals itself. Climate change is different than what we have. Our initial records on these watersheds date back to different climates. So when we compare to those climates, we see a concern and a crisis based on some of the graphs that Vaughn showed without these types of reservoirs. If we have the opportunity to put reservoirs in, whether or not we admit as a society that it is an atonement for our past sins or a preparation for a future climate, we should do it when it makes sense for drinking water and fish. That's my personal opinion.
I'll do this quick. Yeah. So in terms of reservoirs, I think that's maybe one contributing factor to improving storage within the watershed. But again, it has to be site-specific. You can't just put reservoirs everywhere. There's engineering design, there's site-specific concerns, there's financial implications as well. So I think, yes, we need to improve storage within the watersheds. And, potentially dams and reservoirs are one solution to improve in certain areas where it is a good fit. But I think back to the groundwater piece, the understanding that base loads within our rivers and creeks, has a contribution to groundwater, keeping those creeks flowing even when we don't have precipitation, snow melt, or upper elevation storage. I think there's a key link to be made for groundwater conservation. And within our communities that depend on groundwater and are actively pumping groundwater for community use and for commercial and industrial use, we need to think about that connection between, yes, we need to access groundwater for our communities, but not at the expense of flows in our creeks and streams. And I would say the province has done a good job with the updated Water Sustainability Act to actually formally recognize that connection between groundwater and surface water. And now through the ability to license non-domestic groundwater extractions, there's the ability to track that, in terms of like making sure that we're not over extracting or over pumping our groundwater, and that we can quantify and notice where are there hydraulically connected streams, which means a stream that's hydraulically connected to the groundwater table, and make that linkage to groundwater conservation, but also the infiltration, that piece around green infrastructure allowing rainwater and stormwater to infiltrate into the water table, not interrupt the interflow, that's so important, but actually allow recharge into our aquifers, and that's a key piece around storage. So it's not only reservoirs, it's part of it. I think groundwater as a storage is important as well.
Excellent commentary from Julie. I totally agree with that. As a volunteer in the Englishman watershed, we've definitely seen the benefit of Arrowsmith Reservoir. We've also had studies done on the possibility of putting small reservoirs for maintenance of fish habitat on the South Englishman watershed. So those studies have actually been done. And one other quick comment about reservoirs would be that there's a lot of difficulty in trying to find a body that would actually have or maintain the water license for those kinds of structures. We don't really have, we have a lot of difficulty on Vancouver Island, let alone here in this watershed, to find that group that would step forward.
And I'll just finish up a few comments, and Julie alluded to it, and Peter as well. We're in a very unique position here in Parksville in that we do have a tax base that's able to support the infrastructure that's needed to take care of a dam like this. So we're certainly in a unique position here, and we've been able to kind of leverage that and improve the health as well as provide some additional storage for our community.
So thank you, excellent presentations. Very even piece was really good. So I guess my question is just with respect to objectives. So you referenced the water quality objectives, and there's some objectives around the dam operation, which are really interesting. I'm just curious about how you have, like what your perception has been about the value of setting objectives, and what the opportunities are for you in the future. And I'm thinking about things like, well, some of the hydrometrics, maybe channel condition, maybe riparian integrity, maybe land cover metrics, zero-stage distribution across the landscape. Say, look, this is what we're trying to achieve, and this is how well. I mean, you're doing the work to assess how well you're achieving these different things, but are you thinking about how you can come together to say, look, this is what we actually, this is going to be what where we're going to set the bar. And acknowledge, I guess, in that context that they may not be legal. Like the water quality objectives they're not legally established objectives, but they're still really helpful. I shouldn't speak for you, but my sense is that they're helpful.
So the question is, watershed health objectives?
Sure. Well, objectives in general.
Totally get it. I think it would be absolutely right on, bang on that we actually establish watershed health objectives for a watershed like the Englishman River. You want to try and move that forward?
Yeah, so excellent comment. Thank you very much for that. So to speak to the Englishman River in particular, the Ministry of Environment, so I guess Ministry of Environment and Climate Change now, but they do have Englishman River specific water quality objectives that they've developed, and also for French Creek and Little Qualicum within our region. But I think the opportunity now, as a really important next step, is, taking the baseline information that we've been able to collect, at least I can speak to our program in the past 7 years, and actually look at that now to say, where did the BC-wide water quality objectives serve its purpose and fit and meet the needs of having that benchmark of what we want to achieve? But also, where are there specific creeks and streams that are anomalies, that are different, that have different characteristics or different pressures? And there's the ability under the new Water Sustainability Act to develop water quality objectives for particular creeks and streams. So it's like, first, here's the BC-wide, but then you can look at individual water courses and their conditions, and then set your metrics, your indicators. So I think that's a really good next step, and beyond just water quality, but you mentioned land use indicators and metrics for measuring watershed health. I think, again, that's a really key next step. It's like, okay, baseline data, first of all, but now, and that's part of our 10-year updated plan, is what's the vision of where do we want to be within the next decade? And now that we have a baseline to compare to, we can set those objectives and metrics. Anybody else?
Just quickly on the idea of objectives and metrics for watershed scale, like I mentioned in my little 5-minute spiel there, we have to continue to think of watersheds as the base ecological unit and continue to evolve our policies and practices to match nature that way. So nature notices forestry, nature notices farming, nature notices draws on drinking water and fish. It's important that we don't lose sight of the opportunities we have whenever there is a dedicated group of citizens and politicians and civil servants that will understand the science behind this and contribute to making that science better.
One quick comment about setting objectives. We would also like to put in water quality, not only water quality, but fisheries objectives, a series of different objectives that we should try and sustain. Also, water conservation objectives for the communities that live and use the Englishman River watershed. One thing that I pointed out in my slide presentation was that we did have a roundtable that existed. It was called the Englishman River Watershed Recovery Roundtable, and it was specific to the dispensation of funds that were part of the Englishman River Watershed Recovery Plan. That did actually get to a point where we did not have an ability to maintain it, because it was led by basically the volunteer stewardship group, and we didn't have any funding to maintain it. We found that was a really good way of talking with the landowners, with the water utility purveyors, the city, and basically the community. And we lost that. And when it comes to setting objectives, it's also ensuring that the community, our small local community, hears about what's going on. So that's a quick comment on that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. Excellent. A couple of quick questions. The first one to Julie and Jill regarding aquifer mapping. Is it your intention to map all the aquifers, Julie? And because we have quite a few of them in Nanaimo and are very critical for our swimming creeks. And the second question regards forests. And we've seen, and yesterday was a good example when we walked on Shelly Creek, that we're losing a lot of cedars. And that, of course, is related to water. So perhaps you can remind us as to where you think the forests are going and what's going to happen to our trees.
Regarding the objective that we had when we started 10 years ago, there was very little known. When you looked at the boundaries of the aquifers in the Englishman River, it was very, very basic. And when we spent month, but probably 2 or 3 years, looking at every logs of every well and connecting the dots, and we realized how complex the deposits were. Even a 2-meter thick layer of gravel can conduct a lot of groundwater. And you have to be aware of the presence of such layers and how far they go, where they connect to the river. So this is a very minutious type of work that you have to do. And I hope that the work that we did will be included, because I think what we have right now on the ministry's website is still relatively general. It doesn't go to that level of detail, and we need to understand and to characterize aquifers at a very small scale. It's very important, because that information will be key to help managing the land above the aquifer, or the land where the recharge of the aquifer is taking place. So, our work was done with the data available at the time, with the tool available at the time. It's always a work in progress. So I think defining aquifers is a continuous effort. And now we have the tool, we have the databases, and I think we have to be more diligent. We have to input the data more quickly so that decision makers, councils can have that information. The RDN will have that information to manage and to protect the aquifers and the rivers, because it's one water, no question. When we talked about the fish earlier in the conversation, I kind of wanted to jump in, because with the new Water Sustainability Act, one of the bottlenecks now is environmental flow needs. How much water is needed in the river to sustain fish and fish habitats? And there is so much to be done in the province. Right now, like last week, I was involved with a new water supply, a new well for a commercial facility that drilled the well. And now say, okay, now it's time to get the permit. But we call the province say, oh, the nearby creek is fully allocated. You won't get your permit. It's like, oh. So we have to think differently. Groundwater is connected to surface water. Surface water is needed for the fish. We need to think like that. And we need to do our homework. There is a huge amount of homework for fish biologists. We need to understand what's needed for the fish, period. And there is money required to do that. Fish biologists are not volunteers. They need to be paid.
Thanks. Regarding the cedar dieback, that is very evident on southeast Vancouver Island. It is a sad indicator of a warming climate. There's no other explanation for it because of the longer droughts that even the mature cedar in certain locations and certain soil types can no longer tolerate it. From a forest management perspective, Mosaic and Timber West previously takes carbon and the whole contribution to global warming very seriously. We recently got our organizational carbon footprint determined, so we know how much our forests sequester. We know how our products get used to store carbon over time. That's at the macro scale, a demonstration of our sensitivity and what we believe where forest products are a big part of the solution. In the meantime, we have to keep forests growing, and what we have been doing for about 10 years as a province is spending a significant amount of money. I'm not speaking on behalf of the province, but Mosaic Forest Management is part of the provincial forestry programs and cooperatives that study and breed trees and are very selective of where they plant trees based on future climate. So adaptation of our tree species with native species. So we probably would plant now, for instance, a Douglas fir or a pine where we might have planted a cedar previously, knowing that it could be drier. So our forests en masse, on whole, will be fine because we live in this temperate zone, but it's incumbent upon foresters now to use climate-based planting protocols where previously it was geographical. And I can't overstate how important and how much actual funding and support the governments of the day here and the previous governments in this province are putting towards that migration of species because of climate warming.
I have a question and a thank you for Domenico. David James, Quality Beach Greenkeepers. First of all, I want to thank Mosaic for putting up a memorial to Faye Smith on Santa Creek in memory of her work she did with them over the years. I think it was a very thoughtful gesture, so thank you for that. Thank you, Domenico. When I was up on Santa Creek, when I was volunteering at IHES, many of the volunteers with me at the time commented how surprised they were at how close the riparian zone cutting was to the streams. And given climate change and increasing pressure on our streams, the heat, has there been any consideration in your knowledge being given to extending riparian coverage, riparian setback on some of our streams, particularly in the more sensitive areas?
So thanks, good question. When we determine and prescribe a riparian buffer width on any stream on Mosaic property, certainly there are legal backstops, but all of our standard operating procedures are well above those, and that is one of the considerations. The first is essentially making sure that the terrain stability in and around the stream is maintained, wind firmness is attained, shading and stream temperature based on the aspect and direction and gradient of the stream is also included. So yes, we do. I'm always interested if people have examples or requests for specific riparian retention in the Englishman or any watershed, but be assured that as part of our riparian guidelines and standards at Mosaic, those things are incorporated into our plans.
Thank you, Panelists. Melissa Shaw with the Parksville River Watershed Roundtable. I have two questions. One, when it comes to data collection, are there any sites where you actually have beaver activity and so that you're collecting data on how the beavers are actually restoring watershed health? I know our neighbors to the south have a really exciting and growing body of literature that shows, of course, nature's keystone engineers can do a lot for complexity and biodiversity and whatnot. But in urban context, we are obviously challenged as to how to rewild our stream, our creeksheds. My second question for you is, 2+ decades ago, I remember coming across the term in the literature, carrying capacity. So I'm curious if that term is ever brought up in any of your conversations as part of your goal setting or objectives when we talk about land use and densifying the urban environments. The Delta woman brought it up earlier this morning, and as a reviewer of development applications where we see site coverage in multi-zone areas now being 95 to 100% coverage, what is that going to ultimately do if we don't talk about carrying capacity of a watershed? Thanks.
Okay, I'll take the beaver question. So, from a volunteer stream stewardship perspective, we do have a number of sites that we do run into beaver, and we don't identify them and their dams and the activity on a data collection standard. I'm interested in anybody else that does do that, but we don't at this point, and it's a great idea. It's another indicator that we should be probably monitoring on a regular basis. We do have a number of side channels in the river within the park, the RDN park that exists, the Englishman River Park, and properties immediately adjacent to it that are active, very active with beaver. It represents the fellow who does manage the channel, the Claygon channel. He spends probably 50 to 60% of his time managing beaver materials. So just a quick comment on that. I'm not too sure about carrying capacity. Is the subject carrying capacity of people?
Yeah.
Ooh. Okay, here we go.
Oh, was it good? Here we go. I don't know. Great question. Good to see you, Melissa. So carrying capacity, I mean, yeah, we can't like unpack this whole question right here, but maybe one thing I can contribute is through the Regional District of Nanaimo's Drinking Water and Watershed Protection Program, we started on water budget analysis. So it's essentially a supply and demand analysis across our region, looking at groundwater and surface water, to try and quantify, to the best of our ability, supply. So, how much water do we have within our aquifers and our creeks and streams? And really, we don't have sufficient data to give a figure of this is exactly how much we have. But what we were able to do is actually do essentially a gap analysis to see, okay, across the region, how can we quantify supply and demand? So it's supply, but then the demand piece on, water use and water extraction from rivers and aquifers. The gap analysis was where do we need more data, because early indications show that there might be stress between the two in terms of demand outstripping supply. So the next logical step is to collect data in those key areas where within that first gap analysis, certain flags went up to say, we think it might be approaching, let's actually determine this a little bit better with more information. So the three key areas within our region, in the Neuse, in French Creek, and in Cedar Yellow Point, we've expanded, on top of our regional network of groundwater and surface water monitoring that we have for baseline data collection. In those three particular priority areas, we've expanded and added additional monitoring locations, groundwater, surface water, climate, with the goal to be able to bring that into numerical models that we can run scenarios to say, okay, if supply changes insofar as like climate impacts of drought that lasts 5 months straight, for example, you run that scenario, and then hopefully you can calibrate that within your model to say how does that affect our groundwater levels, our stream levels. You can run scenarios on pumping. So if we add 2 more wells within this aquifer and we pump at this rate, can we model the impact again on groundwater levels and on streams? Or land cover is another scenario that we would look to run. If we have this much development or impervious surface or different composition of land cover, can we then model the effects in our creeks and streams and in our groundwater levels? So that's what we're building towards. The caution from the scientific perspective is, your model outputs are only as good as your inputs. So we're doing the due diligence to make sure our inputs into those models are sound. But that doesn't mean we have to wait 35 years to get new results. It's like we can start now and do some modeling, get some early indicators, and that would be a decision support tool where we can model those impacts. But it does come back to the objectives. So, what do we need in terms of environmental flow needs within our creeks and streams? So having that metric will then help when we run the model and we see those results. Are we meeting the environmental flow needs or not, and how does that management then follow? So I think it's a combination of carrying capacity and data to understand what you have, knowing your impact, but then setting those objectives and thresholds and metrics that we're spoken about. And for beavers, I would look to Bernie Heinrichs with the water supply fishers, and more in conversation, not to put you on the spot here, but I know that his group has encountered some beaver activity on the Millstone River and had some resourceful applications of how they were dealing with that. So if you find Bernie Heinrichs, you can maybe connect. There he is, hand up. We'll listen, Bernie.
Okay, we need to maintain 20% of the mean annual discharge. That's the conservation goal.
So I want to thank everyone. All of a sudden, everyone's got their speaking motivation queued up. I wish I could have gotten to everyone this morning. There's going to be other opportunities, so if you had a pressing question, record it, keep it written down. There's going to be some more opportunities, possibly later today and possibly even tomorrow. It's great now that we're getting inundated with people wanting to come forward, speak about things that are on their mind. We're going to break for lunch now, shortly, and so I wanted to just make a quick point here is, if you are a new group, a new stewardship group, the Streamkeepers Federation and the streamkeepers that may be active in your community have the ability and knowledge to collect all kinds of data. And in this room today, we have Zoanne Morton, we have Pete Law, and probably a few other people that are very, very knowledgeable around the kinds of data that the streamkeepers who are probably already active in watersheds in your community collecting information. I know it's something we're interested in, is trying to leverage that information the streamkeeper groups are collecting and use it on some of our more longer-term planning processes. So there's an opportunity for some networking at lunch. We're going to have lunch. We've run over a little bit. We're going to reconvene at 1:30. And with that, I'd like to thank Pete and the rest of the panel here for leading us into lunch. Thank you.